welcome back to another video feature of the Immersive World's Handbook. Today I am back in Singapore at Universal Studios Singapore, and you can see behind me the ride Revenge of the Mummy, which I had a chance to go on twice today. In this video feature, I want to focus on a comparison. I'm calling this one ride, two places, and specifically I'm looking at how these two rides compare from one theme park to the next. If you've had a chance to listen to some of my other video features today at Universal Singapore, you'll note that what I'm trying to do is compare and contrast this brand of theme parks, which is American and which has been exported to other parts of the world. So now let me focus a little bit on a comparison of the same ride in two different Universal Studios theme parks.
So let me begin the tour here today at Universal Studios Hollywood. And on this particular day when I visited the theme park, I was accompanied by two of my theme park research colleagues, Drs. Filippo Carla and Florian Freitag. And we were quite interested actually in looking at the Mummy ride. And in particular, Dr. Carla is known for his studies of theming that deal with ancient forms of history. So you could see clearly why this would be an important ride for someone like him to analyze. And I think we were in general agreement that there was something missing in terms of the theming of this ride. Now, as I will show you with the comparison of this ride in both places, this clearly is a great branded franchise to build on. The Mummy movies were quite popular. There were multiple versions, sequels of them, and so this is an opportunity, I think, to theme an entire land, as you'll see in Singapore or at Universal Hollywood, just one ride. But it's effective, I think, because it's such an exciting brand and property. If you think about the movies themselves, they deal with excitement, they deal with the supernatural, the gothic, and there's a real sense of adventure as well. And that sense of adventure, I think, lends itself to this type of ride, the type of theming that it could offer. So what I'm showing you here are some scenes from the somewhat themed queuing area that leads into the ride. And on this particular day of our visit, there were hardly any lines, and so I think you saw at the beginning it said 10-minute wait time. In fact, it was much shorter than that. But I think one of the issues that we did note, as I mentioned earlier, was that there wasn't as much theming as you might expect. It seemed like almost you had bits and pieces of scenery placed, certain symbols, as you'll see here, statuettes, some of the hieroglyphs that you can also note here, and it had the appearance of something that lacked that sense of integration, that sense of trying to achieve total immersion. And I think you will see something quite different when I take you through the same ride at Universal Studios Singapore. So we can look here at just a few more examples of the themed queue area. And I have to say that you're not going to see in either locations here or in Singapore any of the ride itself, for obvious reasons. It's a pretty visceral, fast-paced ride, so I wasn't able to take video. If you want any kind of video of either rides in either location, you could certainly go on YouTube and find ample videos available there. But a very exciting ride, and I think a ride that, as I'll talk about in the case of Singapore, does lend itself to both high levels of excitement, the use of speed that you get in a great indoor dark ride, and also that sense of intricate theming. And so in terms of that theming, let's shift then to Singapore. And this was actually, after I visited the Main Street area, this was the first area, theme land, that I saw. And unlike Universal in Hollywood and Los Angeles, this entire area was themed. So you actually had a theme land that was based on what was called ancient Egypt. And then the Mummy, Revenge of the Mummy, was one of two rides that were available for guests. So I guess the first point of comparison here is to say, by taking this one property, and I'm not sure if their design thought was to begin with that ride, the Mummy ride, and then expand out. I don't have that information. But my sense is what they've done is said, let's use the ancient Egypt theming In a sense, the Mummy ride becomes an anchor store that you might experience if you were in a shopping mall. It's that same concept. It's the main attraction in the ancient Egypt theme land. And as you can see here, what they've done is they've really focused attention to the minute details in terms of creating the luck, the various patinas here that give this appearance of antiquity, of the past, of what some have called the sense of pastness that we see, or rather experience, when we see something that looks to be old to us, ancient and archaic. So we get into the theming here, and you'll notice that they have here the Oasis Cafe, which is, I thought, very well themed. And I will, by the way, have another video feature about what I'm calling Egyptomania, which I think fits in well with this theme land and the sense of what they're conveying here with this ancient Egypt theming. And so we'll just leave the restaurant here. And as you can see, here's another example of extending the theme beyond the one main anchor ride. So in this case, you have a reference to the famous Carter and King Tut, of course, here at Carter's Curiosities. And this is a gift shop, and of course all theme parks are known for their gift shops. I actually liked how this gift shop wasn't directly tied to the Revenge of the Mummy ride. In some cases at theme parks today, you'll note that there's a one-to-one correlation between the ride and then the gift shop, with most of the gifts focusing only on that one property. I think it's smarter in this case to extend the, in this case, the theming, the opportunities to purchase some of that theming and take it home with you. They've extended that in some, I think, very important ways or interesting ways. Reminds me a little bit of some of the gift shops I remember at the Luxor in Las Vegas. And you can see here then we have a restroom also that is carrying that theming forth and expanding upon it. And here we're looking at the second ride that you see in the ancient Egypt theme land at Universal Singapore. And this is called Treasure Hunters. And I found that this was fairly well themed, and there were elements towards the end of the ride with these scarab beetles that also did reference all of the Mummy films. So there was some cross pollination, I guess you could say, between the theming in the one ride and then the second ride. This one, however, I have to say, wasn't as visceral or exciting as the Mummy ride, and it seemed like it was more of a family type ride. They did do some nice theming though. As you can see here, you have the stereotypical archaeologist's desk with books and so forth, and then there's an Egyptian statue also that are coming upon here that you can see. And this is part of the ride just as you're leaving the station and embarking on the first part of it. You can also see they've extensively themed their queue area with all sorts of antiquities and ancient artifacts. I will say, unfortunately, because I had to leave my bag in a locker, I didn't take photos of the queuing area, and I wish I had some photos, so do look those up online if you can. It was one of the best themed queuing areas I've ever seen. I think maybe second or tied with Epcot's Test Track, which also has very, very incredible theming within the queuing area. And let me say something also about the ride and comparing the two rides. I think I would say that Universal Studios Hollywood, their Mummy ride was lacking two things. One was the theming, and the theme, I would say, not just in the queuing area, but also on the ride itself in terms of using scenic opportunities to immerse guests within the story of that ride. That was lacking. And then also I felt that the execution, the visceral elements, the speed, the pacing, the editing, if you will, those all were pulled off much better at the version in Universal Studios Singapore. Now, of course, I should say that there are multiple reasons as to why two rides would be different in two different places. And of course, one reason that's quite obvious could be economics. You don't have the investment available for capital to do the kind of theming you want to do. I became quite familiar with this when I worked at Six Flags Astroworld, and in fact, we sometimes were upset that we couldn't have the best theming or the best rides because Six Flags wasn't investing as much in the park in Houston as it was in some of the other theme parks across the country. Now, a second reason is more cultural. So we take the same ride and we think we're going to take this branded property and we're going to simply attach it and plop it down in Culture B if it came from Culture A. The problem with that, of course, is there are different associations with that brand from one culture to the next. Classic example of this is the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror ride, and when it was taken from the American context and put into, say, an Asian context, the storyline had to be adapted just a bit. And I think this is quite key, clearly, because not everyone is going to understand the ride or the associations with the ride in the same way. So it's important to think of adaptation when you're taking one ride and adapting it. Even though it has essentially the same message or meaning behind it, the culture in which you're adapting it to or in certainly will require that you have to make some changes. So I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity today to take a look at the famous Revenge of the Mummy ride and to see how it was expressed in these two locations, Universal Studios Hollywood and Universal Studios Singapore. And please come back for additional video features here in Singapore and from other sites around the world for the Immersive Worlds Handbook.